The great hall of the alien palace was alive with music and light. Golden banners hung from the ceiling, and crystal lamps floated in the air, glowing softly. Guests from many worlds filled the long tables, speaking in low voices, drinking sparkling wine and laughing loudly. But at the far end of the hall, away from the crowd, sat Princess Lyra. She kept her head slightly bowed, her long silver hair hiding most of her face. Her gown was beautiful, made of soft blue silk, yet it was chosen to hide her right leg. Beneath the fabric, her limb was twisted since birth, something her people saw as a curse. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers tight around her cup, as if holding it would keep her from shaking. Around her, she could hear the whispers. They should not have let her attend. One voice murmured, "No suitor will look at her." Another laughed softly. She pretended not to hear. But the words were sharp, cutting into her like a blade. It had been like this her whole life, ever since she could remember. She was the princess no one wanted. At the center of the hall, alien nobles danced with pride, their perfect forms moving with grace. Each movement reminded her of what she could not do. Her father, the king, sat on his throne greeting important guests from other planets. He did not look at her, and she knew why. She was ashamed to him, a reminder of imperfection in the royal bloodline. Then, among the crowd, a figure caught her eye. He was not one of her people. His skin was lighter, his build broader, his clothes simple but neat. He was human, one of the envoys from the United Human Colonies. Captain Daniel Hayes. She remembered hearing his name during the introductions. Earlier that day, Daniel noticed her sitting alone. He saw how others looked at her with pity, with disdain, or not at all, and something in him tightened. He had seen cruelty before, but this was different. 'Twas quiet, polite cruelty, the kind that pretended to be proper but crushed a person's spirit. Without asking anyone, he began walking toward her. The crowd noticed, conversations paused, eyes turned. A human walking toward the unfit princess was unusual enough to stir the whole hall. Some smiled in amusement, expecting a joke. Others whispered quickly, as if they could stop him before he embarrassed himself. Lyra looked up when his shadow fell across her table. Her eyes, a pale shade of silver, met his warm brown ones. She expected mockery, a clever insult, maybe a false display of sympathy instead. He gave her a small smile and bowed slightly. "Princess," he said, in a calm, respectful voice, "will you share a drink with me?" The words were simple, but they felt heavy. No one had ever asked her that in public. Her first instinct was disbelief. Surely this was a trick. Her second was fear. The hall was watching, and if she said yes, it could start a storm of whispers. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed her cup down. Daniel waited, not moving, not rushing her. She studied him, searching for a hint of mockery in his face. But there was none. His gaze was steady, as if he truly saw her, not her leg, not her shame, but her. Finally, she nodded and gestured for him to sit. The hall reacted in quiet shock. Some covered their mouths, hiding smirks. Others frowned deeply. Even her father shifted in his throne, his golden eyes narrowing in disapproval. Daniel took the seat beside her and poured more of the sweet alien wine into her cup. "I noticed you were alone," he said softly. "I thought that was a shame." Lyra tried to keep her voice steady. "I am often alone," she replied. "Then I will keep you company," he said simply. His words were so casual, so natural, that for a moment she forgot the eyes watching them. They spoke quietly about the music, the strange floating lamps, the differences between human and alien food. She found herself smiling, just a little. It was strange. She could not remember the last time she smiled during a feast. But their peace was fragile. From across the hall, she heard the faint laughter of noble women. "They say humans are curious about broken things," one whispered, loudly enough for Lyra to hear. The words hit her like ice. She lowered her gaze, her voice tightening. "You should not sit here, Captain. They will think poorly of you." Daniel leaned slightly closer, his voice firm but calm. "Let them think what they want," he said. "I choose where I sit, and who I share a drink with for the first time in years." Lyra felt something warm in her chest, a flicker of hope. It was dangerous, foolish even, but it was there. And as the music played and the night went on, she began to wonder if this human might be different from anyone she had ever known. The feast was over, but the palace halls still glowed with soft light. Servants cleared the long tables, and the music faded into silence. Most guests left in groups, still whispering about what they had seen, the human who sat with the unfit princess. Lyra walked slowly through the empty corridor, her limp more visible now, without the heavy gown hiding it. She had thought the night would end like all the others, with loneliness and stares. But Daniel's voice still echoed in her mind. No one had ever spoken to her with such ease. Without pity or judgment, she tried to tell herself it meant nothing, that tomorrow he would forget. Yet her heart refused to listen. In the royal garden, the crystal trees shimmered under the night sky. Their branches glowed faintly, casting pale light over the silver pathways. Lyra often came here when she wanted to be alone, but tonight she was not alone. Daniel stood near the largest tree, his hands behind his back, looking up at the alien moon. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and that same small smile appeared. "Princess," he greeted warmly. "I hoped I would see you." She hesitated a few steps away. "You should be with the other guests," she said softly. "They're not my friends." He replied, "I'd rather be here." She lowered her eyes, unsure of what to say. For a moment, they stood in quiet, listening to the gentle hum of the glowing branches. Then Daniel spoke again, his voice careful. "I learned something tonight. About why they treat you this way." Her chest tightened. "You mean my leg?" she said, her tone sharp. "Yes," he admitted, "but that is not what I see when I look at you." She laughed bitterly. "Then you are the only one." He shook his head. "I have seen soldiers lose limbs and still lead armies. I have seen people with broken bodies but unbroken spirits." Her eyes lifted to meet his, unsure if he truly meant it. "They say I am unworthy to be a wife, unfit to continue the royal line," she whispered. "That is their blindness." Daniel said firmly, "Not yours." She felt her throat tighten, unsure how to answer. Her whole life had been shaped by those cruel words. Then he took a step closer, his voice steady. "Lyra, you said no one will ever ask for your hand. So let me be the first." The air seemed to freeze around her. She stared at him, unable to speak. He was serious. She could see it in his eyes. "You? You cannot mean that," she whispered. "I do," he said without hesitation. "I would be honored to be your mate." Her heart raced, her mind in chaos. It was impossible, unheard of, a human asking for an alien princess. If the court heard of this, they would rage. "You don't know what you are saying." She told him, "If you say this aloud, they will drive you from the planet." "Then let them try," he answered calmly. She took a small step back, her hands trembling. "This is not a game, Captain Hayes," she said, her voice shaking. "If you stand beside me, you will be hated as I am hated." He nodded. "Then we will be hated together." No one had ever said such a thing to her. Her entire life, she had been told she was a burden, a flaw, a mistake. And now here was someone willing to share that weight, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. It made no sense, and yet it made her want to believe him. A faint rustle came from the garden's edge, in the shadows. A pair of alien nobles stood watching, their expressions cold. They turned and left silently. But Lyra knew this would not stay secret for long. She looked at Daniel, fear flickering in her eyes. "They will tell the court, then let them tell," he said. "I am not ashamed of my words." For a long moment, she searched his face, looking for a trap. A hidden joke. There was none. Only that steady, warm gaze. Slowly, her lips curved into a faint smile. The first genuine one she had felt in years. "If you truly mean this, then I will not refuse you," she whispered. Daniel's hand brushed lightly against hers, not enough to draw attention, but enough to promise he was real. Under the glow of the crystal trees, they stood together in quiet, and though the night air was cold, Lyra felt warm for the first time she could remember. Far away, in the high tower of the palace, a light flickered in the king's private chamber. He had heard the whispers already. The human's boldness would not go unchallenged, and soon the entire court would rise against them. But for now, in the garden, none of that mattered. For the first time, the lonely princess was not alone. By morning, the palace was no longer calm. Whispers ran like fire through the marble halls. Servants carried trays of food, but paused in doorways to share the latest rumor. Guards leaned closer to one another when they thought no one was listening. The human captain had asked to be the mate of Princess Lyra. Some called it madness. Others said it was a calculated insult to the royal family. But most simply laughed. Certain the king would throw the human off the planet before the sun set. Lyra sat in her chamber, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had not left her room since dawn outside. She could hear the distant hum of voices. Every whisper felt like a blade pressing against her skin. She had lived with mockery all her life, but this was different. This time, it was not only about her, it was about him too. There was a soft knock on the door. Her maid entered, eyes wide with fear. "Princess, the council is gathering and the king has summoned you." Lyra's chest tightened. She knew what was coming. The council chamber was already full when she arrived. Tall windows let in the pale light of the alien sun. Nobles in long robes stood around a circular table, their faces sharp with disapproval. At the head of the table sat her father, the king, his golden eyes fixed on her like two burning suns. Daniel stood to one side, flanked by two guards. His posture was calm, his eyes steady, but Lyra could see the tension in his jaw. He had chosen to face this, even knowing what it would mean. The king's voice was like steel. "Captain Hayes, do you deny asking for my daughter's hand?" Daniel's answer was clear and firm. "I do not deny it, Your Majesty." "I meant every word." Gasps filled the room. A few nobles muttered curses under their breath. One elder counselor stepped forward, his tone full of disgust. "A human daring to claim the princess is a disgrace. This is an insult to our traditions, to our bloodline." Daniel did not flinch. "With respect, counselor. A bloodline is not more important than the person who carries it." The words stirred anger like a thrown stone in still water. Nobles began to argue among themselves, voices rising. The king raised his hand for silence. His gaze turned to Lyra. "Daughter, do you reject this human's offer?" The room seemed to hold its breath. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, waiting for her to nod and end this. But something inside her shifted. For years, she had remained silent, letting others decide her worth. Not this time. She lifted her chin, meeting her father's stare. "I do not reject it," she said softly, but firmly. "I accept it." The shock was instant. A murmur rolled through the room like thunder. One noble shouted, "This is treason against our customs." Another hissed, "You will bring shame to the royal name." The king's voice cut through them all. "You defy me, Lyra." Her voice trembled, but she did not look away. "I choose for myself," she said. "If you cast him out, you cast out my choice as well." Daniel's eyes flickered with surprise and pride, but the room erupted into chaos. Several nobles left in anger. Their robes sweeping behind them like storm clouds. As the meeting ended in disarray, the king gave no ruling. His silence was worse than his anger. It meant he was thinking, planning. Daniel walked beside Lyra as they left the chamber. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "I did," she replied. "If I stayed silent, they would think I was ashamed of you. And I am not." That night, the palace felt colder. Guards stood in unusual positions, their eyes following Daniel more than before. He knew the looks. He had seen them in war zones before battle. Someone was planning something just past midnight. Daniel left his guest quarters to get fresh air in the palace gardens. The moonlight painted the pathways in silver. But as he reached the center of the garden, shadows moved behind the crystal trees. Figures stepped out. 3 alien nobles, faces hidden under dark hoods, their hands gripped thin. Curved blades. "This is your last night, human," one of them hissed. Daniel shifted into a defensive stance. He had no weapon, but he had fought in worse situations before. The first attacker lunged. Daniel sidestepped and struck him in the side, sending him stumbling. The second came from behind. But a voice rang out, sharp and furious. "Stop." Lyra was there, her gown trailing behind her. She moved forward, despite the limp slowing her steps. When one of the attackers turned on her, she didn't back away. She stepped between them and Daniel. The blade sliced her sleeve, leaving a thin red line on her arm. Daniel caught the attacker by the wrist and twisted until the weapon clattered to the ground. Guards arrived seconds later, drawn by the noise. The attackers fled into the shadows, disappearing before they could be caught. Daniel caught Lyra by the shoulders, looking at the cut on her arm. "You shouldn't have come out here," he said sharply. She winced, but smiled faintly. "For once, I wanted to protect someone who saw me as more than my limp." In the shadows beyond the garden, unseen, a tall figure watched. The king had seen enough to know this was no ordinary human, but he also knew this would force the council's hand. If Daniel wanted to stay, he would have to face the most dangerous challenge of all, asterisk. The palace was quieter than usual the next morning. Servants moved quickly through the halls, avoiding eye contact. Rumors of the garden attack had already spread, though no one spoke of it openly. Lyra's arm was wrapped in a soft white bandage, a faint line of red showing where the cut had been. Daniel had hardly slept. He had stayed near her chamber until dawn, making sure no one tried to harm her again. Every shadow in the corridor felt dangerous. Every glance from the guards carried a question he could not answer. The king summoned him to the throne room at mid-morning. The air inside was heavy, as if the stone walls themselves were listening. The king's golden eyes studied him for a long time before he spoke. "You fought in the garden last night," he said, his tone calm but cold. "Yes," Daniel replied. "They came for me. She put herself between us." The king's jaw tightened. "She is my daughter," he said. "And yet she risks herself for a human." Daniel met his gaze without fear. "She risked herself for someone who treats her as she deserves." The silence that followed was sharp. Finally, the king waved a hand, dismissing him. But Daniel knew this was not over. That evening, Lyra insisted on walking in the gardens again. Daniel tried to argue, but she shook her head. "If I hide now, they will think I am afraid. And they will think you are afraid too," she said. Reluctantly, he agreed. Staying close at her side, the moon was bright that night, bathing the crystal trees in silver light. For a while, it was peaceful. They spoke quietly about the stars. Above them, Lyra told him the names her people had given to each one. Daniel shared stories from his homeworld: blue oceans, green forests, and skies filled with birds. Then, from the far side of the garden, a sudden cry broke the calm. It was sharp, desperate, the sound of someone in pain. Daniel's instincts kicked in instantly. Stay here, he told Lyra, moving quickly toward the sound. He found one of the younger palace servants struggling in the grip of a cloaked attacker. The servant's eyes were wide with terror, a blade pressed to his throat. Daniel didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, grabbing the attacker's wrist and twisting hard. The blade fell, clattering against the stone path. But before he could finish, another attacker emerged from the shadows behind him. Daniel turned. Blocking a strike aimed at his chest, the first attacker recovered and came at him again. 2 against 1 was dangerous, but Daniel had fought worse before. A third figure suddenly appeared, Lyra, moving as quickly as her leg would allow. In her hand, she held a heavy metal staff from the garden's ceremonial stand. Without hesitation, she swung it, striking the second attacker in the side. The man staggered, giving Daniel the opening he needed to knock the first one down. Run! Daniel shouted to the servant. The boy fled toward the palace, calling for guards. The remaining attacker tried to grab Lyra. Daniel caught him by the collar and slammed him against the nearest tree. The man went limp, sliding to the ground when the guards finally arrived. The attackers were already on the ground, groaning in pain. The captain of the guard looked at Daniel with something like respect. "You may have just saved more than the princess tonight," he said, but the look the king gave from the balcony above was unreadable. Later, in her chamber, Lyra sat by the fire while Daniel cleaned a small scrape on her hand. "You should not have come into the fight," he said quietly. Her eyes softened. "You think I am weak because of my leg? But I am not." He paused, then shook his head. "No, you're not weak. You're braver than half the soldiers I've fought beside." She smiled faintly, but there was worry in her eyes. "They will not stop, Daniel. Not until you are gone." He met her gaze. "Then they will have to try harder." A knock came. At the door, it was a royal messenger, his expression stiff. "The king commands the presence of Captain Hayes in the council chamber at first light," he said. Daniel knew what this meant. The king was ready to decide his fate. When morning came, the council hall was full. The king sat high on his throne. The elders gathered around him. Daniel stood alone in the center. "You wish to?" "Claim the hand of my daughter," the king said. "Then you must prove yourself worthy." By our laws, the words hung in the air like a challenge. Lyra's eyes widened in alarm. The king's voice was steady. "You will face the trial of worth. If you survive, the council will honor your request. If you fail, you will leave this planet forever." Gasps filled the chamber. The trial of worth was legendary, dangerous, deadly, and never before attempted by a human. Daniel didn't hesitate. "I accept," he said, his voice strong. The king's gaze was cold, but there was a faint glimmer of respect. "Then prepare yourself, Captain Hayes. Tomorrow, your trial begins." Lyra's heart pounded as she looked at him. She knew the trial was not just a test, it was a death trap, and if he failed, she would lose him forever. The morning of the trial came with a sky painted in deep red. Some said it was a sign of bad fortune. Others whispered that it was the planet itself warning the human to turn back. Daniel stood in the courtyard, wearing light armor provided by the palace. It was not much protection, just enough to give him a fighting chance in his hand. He carried a short spear and a small round shield before him. The king and the council stood on a raised platform. Beside them was Lyra, her silver eyes filled with worry. The king's voice rang out across the courtyard. "Captain Hayes, to claim the hand of my daughter, you must pass the trial of worth. Enter the flame caves and bring back the crystal bloom." Untouched and whole, a murmur passed through the crowd. The crystal bloom only grew deep inside the caves, guarded by heat, darkness, and things far worse than any soldier. Daniel glanced at Lyra and gave her the smallest nod. Then he turned toward the dark mouth of the cave. The air grew hotter with every step the moment he crossed the threshold. The sound of the crowd vanished behind him. Inside, the walls glowed faintly with veins of red stone. Heat pressed against him like a heavy blanket. Sweat began to run down. His back almost immediately, the deeper he went, the darker it became, until the only light came from the faint glow of molten cracks in the rock. The first challenge came quickly. A narrow ledge over a pool of bubbling lava stretched ahead. The heat rose in waves, making the air shimmer. Daniel pressed his back to the wall and edged along carefully. One wrong step would mean falling into the molten fire below. He focused on his breathing, moving slowly until he reached the other side. The next chamber was filled with strange, sharp crystal spikes jutting from the floor and ceiling. They seemed harmless until he stepped forward. The ground shifted, and the crystals moved like living things. Closing in, Daniel raised his shield. Forcing his way through, the sharp edges scraped against the metal, leaving deep scratches by the time he reached the far side. His arms ached from holding them back in the silence that followed. He heard something else breathing. From the shadows, a shape moved. A creature emerged, its body low to the ground, its skin like molten rock. Its eyes glowed yellow, fixed. On him, Daniel gripped his spear tighter. The beast circled, heat radiating from its body. When it lunged, he sidestepped and drove the spear into its side. The weapon hissed as it met the hot flesh. The creature roared, striking his shield hard. Enough to rattle his bones, Daniel pushed forward, using his weight to drive the beast back. Finally, with one last thrust, it collapsed, its glow fading. He didn't stop to rest. Time in the trial was limited. Further in, the heat became almost unbearable. His throat felt dry, and every breath burned. But then he saw it, in the center of a small chamber, growing from a crack in the rock, the crystal bloom. Its petals shimmered like glass, glowing softly, untouched by the fire around it. Daniel approached carefully. One wrong move could shatter it. Kay knelt, cutting it free with slow, steady hands. The flower was lighter than he expected, and strangely cool to the touch. He wrapped it in a piece of cloth and secured it to his belt. The way back was worse. The heat seemed stronger now, as if the cave itself was trying to keep him from leaving. At the lava ledge, the air swirled with hot wind, forcing him to move faster. He slipped once, his foot nearly going over the edge, but caught himself just in time when he finally stepped out into the light of the courtyard. The crowd erupted in gasps. Daniel was drenched in sweat, his armor scorched, his shield battered, but in his hands, he held the crystal bloom, whole and unbroken. Lyra's eyes widened, and for the first time in days, a smile touched her lips. The king stepped down from the platform, studying the flower in silence. The council members whispered among themselves. Unable to deny what they saw, the king turned to face the crowd, his voice carrying over the courtyard. The human has passed the trial of worth. Some cheered, others muttered in disbelief, but no one could challenge the result. Daniel glanced toward Lyra, and she met his gaze, her expression full of pride and something deeper relief. He had done it, not for the title, not for the approval of the court, but for her. Yet even as the crowd slowly dispersed, Daniel knew this wasn't the end. The trial had proven his worth by law, but winning the hearts of those who despised him, that would be the true challenge ahead. The courtyard still buzzed with voices long after Daniel returned with the crystal bloom. Some spoke of his courage, others of his foolishness, but none could deny what they had seen. A human had passed. The trial of worth. It was a victory no outsider had ever achieved. Daniel stood in the cool shade of the palace's outer hall. His hands still ached from gripping the spear. His armor smelled faintly of smoke from the molten caves, but he felt lighter. As if a heavy weight had been lifted from his shoulders, the king approached, his long robes whispering over the stone floor. He stopped just a few steps away, his golden eyes locked on Daniel. "You have done what no human has done before," he said, his voice low but carrying. "By our law, you have earned the right to ask for my daughter's hand." Lyra stood beside her father. Her heart was pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. Her silver eyes met Daniel's, and for a moment, the rest of the world seemed to fade. He had risked everything, and for her, the council gathered in a half-circle behind. The king, some faces were tight with anger, others carefully blank. One elder stepped forward. His tone sharp. "The law is clear, Your Majesty. But tradition is not only law. Traditions bind our people." The king raised his hand for silence. "This matter is no longer for debate," he said. "By trial and by law, the human has proven himself worthy. The court will honor the result. It was a victory, but not a complete one." The air in the hall felt tense, heavy with unspoken grudges. Daniel could read it in their eyes. Some would accept the decision. Many would not, after the council dispersed. Lyra walked with Daniel through the palace gardens. The glow from the crystal trees painted the path in soft silver light. "You did it," she said quietly. "You made them see you, and you made them see me differently." Daniel gave a small smile. "I only showed them what was already there." Her voice softened. "You don't understand. For so long, I believed I would never be more than a shadow in my own home. Today, you pulled me into the light." They stopped at the edge of the reflecting pool. The water shimmered under the moon, mirroring the stars above. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Daniel finally said, "Passing the trial was the easy part. Now comes the hard part." She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "Winning over hearts," he said. "The law may be on our side, but the people, the nobles, they will still look for ways to undo this." His words proved true faster than either expected. The next morning, whispers ran through the palace again. This time, they weren't about his victory. They were about a petition. A group of nobles had gathered signatures demanding the king block the marriage despite the trial. When the king refused to break the law, the nobles changed tactics. They began to spread lies, saying Daniel had cheated, that the crystal bloom he brought back was fake. Servants carried these rumors through the halls. Even some guards began to look at Daniel with new suspicion. Lyra grew angrier with each passing day. "You faced fire and death to bring back that flower," she told him one night, "and still they try to take it from you." Daniel shook his head. "I expected this. They're fighting because they know they're losing." A week later, the king called for a formal ceremony. It was to be the public acknowledgement of Daniel's victory, a declaration that the princess was now promised to him. The great hall was filled with guests from across the planet. Bright banners hung from the ceiling, and guards lined the walls. When Daniel stepped forward, the crowd fell into a tense silence. The king's voice rang out, "By the trial of worth, and by the will of the law, I name Captain Daniel Hayes, the chosen mate of Princess Lyra." Some clapped politely, others stayed still. But Daniel's eyes were only on Lyra. She stepped toward him, her gown flowing like water, and placed her hand in his. It was a simple gesture, but it sent a clear message. They stood together. That night, as they walked through the quiet corridors, Lyra spoke softly. "You have given me more than I thought I could have, but I fear they will never stop trying to take it away." Daniel's voice was steady. "Then they will find that I'm harder to move than they expect." In the shadows beyond the torchlight, a pair of unseen eyes watched them leave. The figure turned and slipped away, carrying a message to someone who would not let this union happen without a final fight. The celebration was over. The next storm was already on its way. The day of the wedding dawned under a sky so clear it looked like polished glass, from the highest towers to the lowest streets. The entire capital shimmered with silver and gold banners. Crowds filled the plaza outside the palace, eager to see the union that had been whispered about for weeks. Some came with hope, others with doubt, but none could deny the importance of what was about to happen. Inside the palace, Princess Lyra stood before a tall mirror. Her gown was unlike anything she had worn before, flowing white silk threaded, with strands of light that caught the glow of the crystal lamps. She did not hide her limp today. Instead, the gown was cut so that she could walk freely, each step showing she would no longer cover what she was. Her ladies fussed with her hair, weaving in tiny silver blossoms when they were done. She looked every bit a princess, but more than that, she looked free. Her heart pounded as she thought of the man waiting at the altar. A man who had faced fire, steel, and scorn just to stand beside her in another chamber. Daniel tightened the simple ceremonial armor he had chosen instead of the elaborate robes offered to him. It was a quiet statement. He was still a soldier at heart, and today he would stand as her protector as much as her mate. The crystal bloom from the trial was fixed to his chest plate. Glowing faintly like a promise, the great hall was transformed into a sea of light. Rows of alien nobles in their finest robes lined either side. At the far end, the king stood beneath a towering arch carved from living crystal. Though his face was stern, there was no anger in his eyes now, only the weight of a decision that would change his world. The music began, low and haunting. The sound of strings mixed with the soft chime of crystal bells. Lyra appeared at the doorway. Gasps rippled through the crowd, not because of her beauty alone, but because she walked. With her head high, not hiding her steps, each movement was steady, proud. Daniel's eyes met hers from across the hall, and for a moment, it felt as if they were the only two people there. When she reached him, the hall fell silent. The king stepped forward, his voice carrying over the assembly. "This union is not one our traditions foretold," he said, "but it is one our law demands, and one my daughter has chosen." He looked at Daniel, then at Lyra. "May this joining bring strength to our people, and peace between our worlds." Daniel took her hands gently. "I came here as a stranger," he said softly enough, "for only her to hear, but you made me fight for something I didn't know I needed. You," Lyra's lips curved in a faint smile, "and you gave me back my worth." The king placed their joined hands on the crystal altar. Light flared from beneath their palms. Weaving around their wrists in a band of silver, it was the ancient, binding a symbol that could not be faked or forced. The crowd watched as the light sank into their skin, marking them forever. Some nobles bowed reluctantly, others with genuine respect. Among the humans present, quiet pride shone in their faces. Daniel knew this moment was more than a marriage. It was the joining of two worlds that had never stood as equals before. When the vows were complete, Daniel leaned forward and kissed her. It was not a display for the crowd, but a quiet promise, meant only for her. Still, it sent a wave through the hall, a breaking of 1,000 years of unspoken walls. Outside, the bells rang across the city. Crowds in the plaza cheered, their voices rising into the clear sky. For the first time, no one whispered about Lyra's limp. They spoke instead of the courage she had shown, and the man who had chosen her for who she was that night. As the stars spread across the sky like a river of light, Daniel and Lyra stood. On the highest balcony, the city glowed below them. "Do you think they'll ever stop doubting us?" she asked quietly. Daniel smiled. "Maybe. But even if they don't, it won't change how I see you." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Then let the stars watch," she said, "because this is the beginning of our story. Not the end, far beyond the city walls." Ships from both worlds shone in orbit. Some carried envoys, others merchants. But all knew they were witnesses to something rare, a bond that had crossed every line drawn between peoples. And somewhere deep in the hearts of those who had once doubted, a small seed of change began to grow. For the galaxy had seen many weddings, but this was the one they would remember. the wedding that changed the stars.